Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And I say this every week, but every week it proves to be true. We have a really special guest with us this afternoon. And this week we are celebrating our 3rd year of doing Belonging. So we have a special Belonging 3rd anniversary guest. And our 3rd anniversary guest is Pallab Maulik, and he is a professor at the George Institute for Global Health and a visiting professor here at Imperial College London. And I'm going to start off by asking Pallab if he could tell us a little bit just about his early upbringing and what it was that gave him his sense of identity and his sense of belonging as he was growing up.
So so as far as early upbringing goes, my father was a surgeon, and then my mother is a nurse, my brother is also an anesthetist, and so medicine and being involved with the medical field was something that was always there. Like I always wanted to be in the medical field, I think, for very early age.
Mm-hmm.
So that level of what I wanted to do was there from a pretty early age. Then moving on, I moved into my medical training and all, and then into psychiatry and mental health research, which I'm currently doing, which flows from that.
So your background is that your father was a surgeon and your mother was a nurse. So it's kind of like in your genes, as it were. It was the idea of wanting to do medicine was something that you were always engrossed in it. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so when you're at school and going through school, was there anything other than thinking about going for medicine? Did you ever have any other aspirations, or was it always, I just want to do medicine?
You could say that the other aspirations were there, but ones that caught my fancy at times was editing films. So not directing, but editing films.
Okay.
Which I never did. But I do photography, so I still stick to that as a passion at times.
Okay, so we could have had another Steven Spielberg or
not really a Steven Spielberg. He's into direction. So I'm talking about editing. So
okay. I might have to get you on board on editing this then. That's brilliant. So when you got to medical school, or when you were in medical school, which medical school did you go to, and what was the process for you at medical school, and what did you want to do when you were at medical school?
Sure. So in India, you have it as a 2-step process. So you do your basic medical training. I don't know what it's called here, but we call it MBBS training. That was done at Calcutta. So I did it from Calcutta University, or in East India. And I was in Calcutta Medical College, which is the oldest medical college in Asia, actually. That's there. Then I did my residency or my psychiatric training in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which is the premier institute in India as far as medical education goes. That's in New Delhi, and that was in psychiatry. So that's how it goes. In between, I did dabble a little bit in surgery. I think wanting to be a surgeon, but then give it up, realizing that that's really not what I want to do. Really moved into psychiatry, and then subsequently did my training in public health, my master's training in public health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and then my doctoral training from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And that's so brief CV you want.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Before we go into a little bit more detail on the different elements of that, was there, because you said you wanted to dabble in surgery, Was there any particular reason as to why? And what was it that kind of like then said, kind of like put you in on a different track from surgery into
Yeah,
psychiatry?
yeah. So tracking to psychiatry happened because once in India, uh, getting from one into the residency program is a very competitive process, and it's the success rate is like 0.5%. And in the institute that I went in, All Institute of Medical Sciences, the success rate is even less than 0.5%.
Right.
So it's really, really very competitive. And though I did get into, like I had opportunities to get into other surgical streams, it was not in exactly the surgical stream that I probably may have thought about thinking at one point in time. But I think that was a blessing in disguise, because as I moved into psychiatry, and from day one, I really started to feel really engrossed in the whole subject. And I must say, I had been lucky to get fantastic mentors. And one particular mentor, in fact, one of my seniors, my faculty members out here, who still continues to be my primary mentor. He has been really, really instrumental in putting in thoughts about the larger aspects of doing research, beyond clinical research, working with the community, doing something for the larger community. And that's what got me into moving even from clinical psychiatry, which I have given up for almost since 2004. I don't do any clinical work, I just do research. And that has been going on, and that has come out because of my involvement with WHO in my initial training period. I worked with them for 3 years in Geneva. And then that all helped me progress to a more community level field work, and to work with the community. So that's the trajectory. You're muted, Wayne.
Sorry, I wanted to explore a little bit more about the idea of why psychiatry and what it was that attracted you to psychiatry, and then going from clinical psychiatry to more elements of research. And what elements of research is it that you're engaged in?
Yeah, sure. So while psychiatry, as I said, I think a part of it was to do with the way the residency program is structured in India, but also the fact that psychiatry is one of those neglected subjects in India, and there's a huge gap. Like there are very few. If you just look at some of the statistics from low and middle income countries, not necessarily India, it's that only 1 in every 27 people with a common condition like depression gets treated even minimally in countries like India. So that's a huge treatment gap that's there in the country. So that itself was very thrilling, that yes, you are getting into a field where you can make a change. Then the shift happened from clinical psychiatry to community mental health and public health psychiatry. And that happened, I would say, partly because of the close relationship I had with my mentor, and who guided the way my thinking process developed, but also the initial work that I did at WHO, which really opened up my eyes about the vast area of research that is out there in public mental health, and the need for doing that kind of research. And the kind of research that I do is providing community or mental health services for the more disadvantaged communities. And I work primarily in India, but very much with applicabilities in other low and middle income country settings. And when I say disadvantaged communities, I'm talking of rural population, adolescents living in urban slums, transgender communities, incarcerated communities. So really, really disadvantaged communities. And the other big thing in many low and middle income countries, but I think it's across all countries globally, when you look at mental health, there's a huge stigma that is associated with mental health. And I do a lot of work in that area also. So providing provision of services which are more accessible and affordable, using technology to facilitate that process, working with the government to do that, and to address stigma in the community against related to mental health.
You know what, all that you've said is it's just so fascinating, because you've broken it down into the composite parts So looking at it from the disadvantaged communities, yeah, and then looking at it within those disadvantaged communities, things like the stigma which is associated, the lack of treatment. So within your research area, and you mentioned about part of it was triggered by your work with the WHO. Okay, can you just elaborate a little bit about what it was that you kind of like that initial trigger that kind of like got you into that position, and how it's helped to develop you to where you are now?
Sure. So the main work that I did in WHO was called the Project Atlas, which in 2000 was the first step that the world took towards capturing data on the available mental health resources across the globe.
Right.
And this was a huge study that went, so you can imagine that as a young researcher, at that time I was pretty young, not with so many gray hairs as of now, but I'm talking of 2000. So at that point in time, my daily work used to begin with phone calls to different health ministers and health secretaries of the world.
Right.
Like that was my duty every morning, to wake up and to do those phone calls with them, pushing them to provide that details wherever they are not coming forth. And then to collate that into this huge document, which ultimately became Project Atlas of WHO, which until now continues to be one of the flagship projects of the Department of Mental Health. It also led to informing the World Health Report of 2000, which was on mental health. And it continues to inform the World Health Report of 2022, which was again on mental health. So that actually showcased to me the lack of information, the lack of resources that are there globally. And I'm talking of high-income countries, low and middle-income countries, everyone. The treatment gap that I talked to you about, that only 1 in 27 people get treated for depression in countries like India and others, in a high-income setting like in UK, that is just 50%. So even the high-income countries are not doing great. So it's a total lack of care for people with mental disorders globally. And I think that initial work with WHO just opened my eyes about what the situation is and how can we do something for that community, I guess. Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry. I really do find it fascinating that you talk about the not just the gap that there is with the low and middle income countries, but also in the high income countries, there's also a treatment deficit, as it were, because as you said about the stigma. So can you compare and contrast, or give us some ideas of the different types of stigmas which you've encountered, kind of like in the developed countries and those low and middle income countries, and how that impacts on individual sense of belonging and identity?
Yeah. So let's take an example from a low and middle income country where if you go to say a rural setting or an adolescent in an urban slum communities, we have people who have no idea about their stresses. They're going through stressful situations and different stresses. They're going through the symptoms of depression, but they're not able to articulate them properly because they don't know what those symptoms are, because that's unnatural. It's not like a fever or cough or anything. So they are not able to articulate them. They do not have any idea about, if they have those symptoms, where do they go for care? There is no information out there. Even if they do talk about it to someone, they will just be told, oh, you are quote unquote mad, or you are crazy, or some derogatory term would be used, and they will be pushed out of receiving care of any kind. I think those are the stigma that are there in low and middle income settings, not across all low and middle income settings, but many of the low and middle income settings. So that's one extreme. If you move to, say, UK, I think where some of the anti-stigma campaigns like Time to Change have done wonders, I think, in UK. as far as stigma, addressing stigma is concerned. But still, there are many pockets in UK which are pretty disadvantaged. And there are many counties, many suburbs, which have a lot of problems, which are not being addressed properly. And there again, receiving care is an issue. There are also different, I would say, cultural communities, and I can say that for, say, the Asian community, South Asian community, where there is still a lot of stigma around mental health. I'm sure there is also a lot of stigma in the Afro-Caribbean communities also that's there. And these are coming from our cultural backgrounds that we are bringing into the setting. Other than that, there is the issue of communities which LGBTQI A plus communities who also have a lot of stigma. The way people talk to them, think about them. So these are different ways of looking at it.
It's really interesting that the different communities that you are engaged with, because to me it's kind of like, or the question I would want to know, it doesn't sound to me like there's a single trigger. It sounds like it's a combination of societal pressures, work pressures. It's a number of things which can compound and affect your mental health. Is that the experience that you've had when you've done your surveys, done your community work? And is there anything common amongst the different stressors?
To answer your last question, no. I think you may find common trends across things, but if you say one person's problem is similar to another person's problem, no, I would say no, there are differences between what the stresses that you may go, as much as they may look similar. Obviously, you have a different life, I have a different life. So the way it impacts us will be totally different. So that way, every person is unique. And so it's, I think, addressing that uniqueness, which is, I think, important. However, it's also important to realize that mental disorders are a mix of societal or psychosocial pressures or tensions or stressors. And there are some which are on the more biological aspect of it. So there are some mental health conditions which are more genetic and which have more biological underpinnings about them. And there are some which are in the middle. So there are just different groups of mental disorders that are there. And especially if you look at the more which are on the other side, which are more related, say depression, anxiety, which are more psychosocial, stressor related, rather than schizophrenia or autism, which are more biological in nature. I think the ones there, yes, there are some common elements of stress, obviously financial stresses and related to, say, schools pressure in adolescence or breakup of relationship. Those are very common. But again, as I mentioned, the way it impacts you versus me, or for someone else, would be very different. And I think that's the challenge about how to break it up. And nowadays, I think the research is going to a level where people are starting to think that yes, may have depression, I may have depression, the other person may have depression of a similar kind, but even within that, there are certain variations that are there. And there are treatments which are now coming up, which captures those subtle differences, and you can actually stratify the kind of care that is provided and make better usage. So that's the more cutting edge research that is happening about seeing like what are those layers that one needs to go into.
There was something that you said which really resonated, which was about the fact that we are so all unique, and so each one of our mental stresses will be different. But when we think about it from the point of a treatment, then, because you were just mentioning there about stratifications and types, different things that we can do, can you give us some illustrations or examples of, and I like the way that you had broken down the biological aspects compared to those which are almost socially imposed upon us because of things which have happened. Can you give us an example of some kind of treatments or some kinds of, I'm not going to say treatment, preventative measures which people could potentially take to help to regulate their mental state, if there is anything like that?
So this is going back to your sense of belonging, I think, is that the social support system. I think that's very important, and especially in the ones which are related to depression, anxiety type of disorder, which are more related to psychosocial factors. I think availability of good social support system, the sense of belonging to a community, these are all very critical. There has been research which has shown that if you come from a community which is disjointed, then the issues get aggravated. There has been research to show that if you're coming from a housing society which has more broken window panes, there is more depression, which is an indication that that housing society has some issues which are then related to your mental health condition. And there is research to show that if proper steps are taken by the government, and I think there is research from UK itself, from London itself, which has shown that when the government actually puts its mind into something and does a proper job of developing good green spaces, good environmental situations, and changes a community which is maybe going down, brings it up and makes things look better. I forget the name of that particular area of London where the study was done, but it's really closely interlinked with that sense of belonging, the sense that the community started to feel engaged with the community that they are in, the people started to feel engaged with the community they are in, and it helped the mental health of the community per se.
Fantastic. I'm just thinking about it because you've worked in the field for a number of years, and have you seen, what would you say has been the major impact of things like COVID on the state of the mental health, both in developed and low income, developing countries? Have you seen, are you starting to see evidences of worsening mental health issues, and how could we potentially try to address that if there is?
Yeah, so when COVID happened, I think it affected everyone across the globe, and it's very natural for depression, anxiety, all of that happening, lots of deaths happening across, more deaths in countries like India compared to, say, UK or all, which their population is also more, but we were also affected more severely, as many of you have seen. And then the effect of it, and that's my perception, and at that point of time, we did see a surge in depression, anxiety across any study that was done at that point in time showed that. However, as things have started to normalize, I have a feeling that we will all come back to the baseline level again pretty soon. So it's not that it will be a sustained effect, unless those families which have had a major trauma, whether it be loss, a death in the family, or a loss of job, or any of those conditions. So again, as you take out the stressors one by one, I think the mental health symptoms will also gradually come down. Depends on how soon those stressors are taken out.
Right. Okay. So it's almost being able to help regulate the stressors is a key element to an individual's mental health,
especially for the ones which are more psychosocial related, like the depression and anxiety. However, say for autism or intellectual disability, or schizophrenia to a large extent, those are more biological. So you really need to address that part more.
So in your work, do you focus more on the biological or on the social, the psychosocial issues? Which one is it that you?
So my focus has been more on the psychosocial aspect of it, rather than the biological. Though I must say, I do have an interest in the epidemiology of intellectual disability. I haven't worked in the area or with, say, individuals with intellectual disability besides my residency period. But definitely that is an area of research that interests me for the very particular reason that, again, it's one of the neglected areas, even within the field of psychiatry for research, because there is very little work that's done in that area. It's very difficult area to work in also. It's very challenging to work with individuals with intellectual disability. But I believe there are lots of interventions nowadays which are targeting individuals with intellectual disability and are finding some very good results.
Fantastic. There is a question in the chat which has come through based on the conversation. I'm going to ask, Crystal, are you in a position to ask the question, or should I ask it on your behalf? All right. All right. Let me read what it says in the chat then. It says, very interested by the comments about being more biological mental health conditions and some more pressure or social based. Would it be helpful to class these differently? I imagine that the approach would be different. That's the first part. And then the second part is follow-up for diagnosable conditions with both psychosocial and biological origins. For example, depression can in some instance be more biological based, I think. And if so, what is the difference in the approach when encountering someone with seemingly a more transient stroke acute bout of depression? Is the difference mostly pharmaceutical?
Well, I think the question is very much scientific rather than a question related to what we are discussing about belonging out here today. So, but in brief, I think I would just say that for both, yes, there is a lot of thinking nowadays happening about transdiagnostic treatment, and many there is a thinking process that for many of the mental disorders, it's not like you can have a fixed cutoff point that, okay, you are beyond this, you're ill, you're beyond, not beyond that, you're unwell. There's nothing like that. It's all on in a continuum, and the way you treat it is also that way. The ways, obviously, biological. The more biological it is, it needs medication, but it doesn't mean that medicines are the only treatment for such conditions. For example, just to pick up an example, schizophrenia, for example, yes, you do need antipsychotics, you need medications, but you also need psychosocial care because that's also compromised to a large extent. So you need to address them. I won't go to the details because I think the question was too researchy oriented rather than.
That's fine. That's fine. What I was going to say is, like, next week, we're at Imperial, we know we're celebrating Mental Health Awareness Week, right? And there's been a number of initiatives which they're pushing forward, things like exercise, mindfulness, and other things like that. In your view, and from your expert opinion, what are some of the best ways of individuals gaining that equilibrium for and that balance to reduce or alleviate the symptoms or the possible onset of mental health conditions?
As I mentioned, for many of the psychosocial problems, I think when we as clinicians talk to our patients about, okay, what are the steps that you can take to improve your symptoms? The main things that we think about is to identify the key stressor, or to work with the patient to identify the key stressor, to do some problem solving and to use simple ways to do it. Obviously, don't go out of the way to say something that it's just not practical to do. So find something that are easy solutions and the way to do it. Building up the psychosocial, the social support system, whether it be family members, community, or community services, that kind of structure. I think, and for psychiatric care, the mindfulness, relaxation therapies, meditation, yoga, all of these are all very useful methods that can be used to relax your mind. I think at the end of the day, everything is about that, to make yourself more relaxed. And so any of those measures, sports, watching movies, talking with friends, anything that helps you to relax yourself, I think it's worthwhile taking up.
Okay, that's fantastic. I'm going to see if there's any other questions from the audience. Otherwise, I've got another couple of questions which I would like. So if anyone would like to ask a question, if you raise your hand at this point, then that would be great. If not, then I will ask my other questions. All right, Crystal has come in. Crystal, let's hope you're...
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I chose to sign in because on my phone so that I could follow up. Actually, so thanks very much, Pallab. I find this very interesting, but I don't know if you benefit from perhaps not spending a tremendous amount of time on social media. But I disagree with you that the distinction between, biological and kind of psychosocial is merely an academic one. And the main reason is what's become very popular is this trend of saying that you are actually something, right? So there's a very popular hashtag, which is, actually autistic. You can also say, I'm actually ADHD. I actually suffer from depression. And it's creating almost this categorization, right? Where, your identity could be that you have this kind of diagnosed mental health condition, and that separates you from everyone else. And I almost imagine, what does that mean for someone going through going through a bout of depression, rather than kind of being identifying as being depressed, because it almost, to me, seems to diminish their experience of depression, right? It diminishes your experience of anxiety when we have this kind of dichotomy existing right now, where somebody can have an actual condition and somebody else can maybe just be not coping well. It almost seems to me to be feeding into the stigma you were referring to about mental health, but almost when you think about I at least know from the Afro-Caribbean perspective, when you're saying something like a mental health condition and there being a stigma, it's usually the stigma is that you're just not dealing well, right? It's not that there's anything wrong with you, it's just that you're not coping as well as everybody else, despite facing the same kind of concerns. And so to me, this notion of actual mental health versus imagined mental health is actually quite a problematic approach, and it does tie into individual identity.
No, I think what I understood from what you're saying is that you are supporting that the notion that people who are so-called, as you're terming it, imagining themselves to be depressed are different from people who are diagnosed as being depressed. I'm totally agreeing with that. I'm saying, yes, that is actually what you are saying is that, no, they are not different. It's just what I'm saying, that they're at a continuum. And so someone who is probably has a formal diagnosis, a clinician diagnosis of being depressed, is probably at one extreme of the continuum, whereas someone who is probably unable to face a stressor and is suffering from some of the symptoms of depression, maybe they are not yet clinically as per the current diagnostic systems, which themselves can be criticized at different points of view, but they are still depressed in a way. They are not able to cope with whatever symptoms that they have. So they have a quote unquote problem, if you are want to call it that way. So I totally agree with you that it's all in one straight line, whether you are at one extreme or the other.
Could I just chime in here for a second and just ask for a little bit of clarification in terms of the question which Crystal was asking, in terms of when you mentioned about social media and about the idea of people saying, well, I'm actually this. Is it that you're saying that they're taking on a label, or they're then You said this.
Yeah, I think it does two things. I think the first thing is it very much gives you a sense of belonging, right? Because you find a group, right? The one that I've seen most common is actually autistic, right? That's the one that's very popular. So I am actually autistic, right? And so I think that the one thing it does is it does give people a sense of belonging. And I don't know how you feel, Pallab, about whether or not, about what the implications are of people finding a sense of belonging through a mental health condition. But I would also say that, so there's the group that identifies, but then there's the group that's being kind of told that maybe what you're experiencing isn't as real, right? because we're the diagnosed and you're the other, right?
No, I get your point, Crystal. And honestly, if we start discussing that, it could open a whole Pandora's box, which we can go on discussing forever. I think, but as I said, without going into the whole controversial issue about whether labeling oneself as actually this or that is helping, it may be helpful for the person who is doing that. And if that person feels that by doing that, they feel more comfortable, then my point is that, okay, that is fine with you, but then don't go about and saying that, yes, I am this, but you are not that, so please get away. So that's my point, that yes, if you feel comfortable labeling yourself as something, then please do so, because that's what you are at the end of the day, you feel comfortable. But that doesn't give you the right to say that that other person is a sham or is maybe something like that. That's not right.
Fantastic. I think the point I think you're making, which is well made, is not to other people just because you're saying, well, I have this diagnosis, you don't, and use it as something to almost make them feel othered in that community or in their community. Right. That's brilliant. Thank you. I'm just wary of the time. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my final couple of questions. Right. I think the stuff that you've done is absolutely fascinating, and I could sit down and I could talk with you for hours about how you've gone about your research and the things which you're uncovering. But I'm going to ask two little questions. I'm going to ask the first question, which is, what advice would you have given to your 16-year-old self before embarking on this journey of discovery which you've gone on? And in response, what do you think your 16-year-old self would have looked at you and said, wow, you've done that, or wow?
So my 16-year-old self would have been totally amused with seeing me here. So that's, in short, putting it that way. And I think it applies to all of us. All of our 16-year-old selves would have been amused seeing us. Probably I'm talking too much. But yeah, but I think it's, at the end of the day, as I mentioned, I always wanted to be a doctor. So that's definitely a box ticked, and which has been there all through. Whether I would be in psychiatry, no, I hadn't thought of it at the age of 16. Though I was interested in something in that area, but never thought that I would become a psychiatrist. Whether I would become a mental health researcher and working in public health and giving away all my clinical work, I thought of it when I was starting my psychiatry residency also. So I think perspectives change over time, and you keep on adding to those, so you hopefully grow wiser and to learn new things. But at the end of the day, I must say that I'm pretty happy with the stage that I'm in, with the work that I'm doing, the network that I have built, not only at Imperial, but even through all my career stages. And I believe that that sense of belonging at whether it be at my professional level or my individual level has helped me develop my own skills, both personally as well as professionally.
Fantastic. There was a question just popped into my head just as you were summing up there. So I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to ask this final question. You are here at Imperial as a visiting professor. right? And I know that you work in the field of global mental health. What is it that you wanted to bring to Imperial, which you felt was different to what was already here?
Right. So when I saw the call for this position,
Mhm.
and I was looking at the work done by my colleagues out here at Imperial, like my
Mhm.
colleagues in psychiatry or in mental health research, what I found is that Imperial does a lot of cutting edge work, uh, but in mental health specifically, the work that is being done is very domestic. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be doing domestic work. I think there are lots of issues and it's all very good. You really must be doing domestic work. But there was an opportunity that I saw here of also taking some of that research or encouraging my colleagues out here to think beyond the borders of UK and to take research beyond the UK. Because there are many cutting edge research can be done in a high income country like UK, which cannot be done in a low and middle income country, but can be translated to a low and middle income country. And that is the power of it. So the funding that's there in UK to do that kind of research will never be available, or at least is not available in most low and middle income countries right now. But if that learning, that knowledge can be taken to a low and middle income country, the impact of it can be huge. And so that is what I really hope to give to my colleagues out here, the opportunity, the network that I have. And I'm seeing that. I feel that I'm facilitating that, and I believe I'm doing that. There are lots of collaborative projects that are being started or at least being thought about within my team out here that looks at doing research beyond the borders of UK to take the learnings from UK, take it to another country. And the results will affect UK also, because many of those countries that the research is going out to are also the same people who are based in UK.
Yeah.
So there's a reverse of that knowledge that will come and affect your thing. And I'll give you a very small example that we were thinking we are doing with the School of Engineering is to look at and a kind of a chatbot kind of thing to talk about dementia with the more marginalized communities in UK.
Yeah.
And that is some of the things that can help, the knowledge from some of those communities outside, those countries outside UK that can help the countries out here, the communities out here.
Brilliant. Thank you for expanding on that, right? Because I think it's really important that for me, it sounds like you say facilitating, you're a conduit, you're helping to bridge the gap in knowledge from what's here in the UK with what potentially could be done and could be used to enhance the experiences in lower and middle income countries. So I think that,
but also vice versa,
and vice versa. So that's why I said you're the conduit to bridge the gap.
Yes.
So absolutely brilliant. I wanted to say a really big thank you for being our third anniversary guest. It's been a pleasure having this discussion with you, and I'm sure we're going to have many more in the future.
Thanks, my pleasure, and I look forward to future discussions.
Brilliant. I'm going to just share with everyone what's happening next week, and then if anyone wants to stay on, we'll have a few minutes to just have a conversation with Pallab afterwards. So next week we're going to have Dr. Norris Igben Iweki, and he is a clinical research fellow at Imperial College and the University of Oxford, and he's also a Fulbright scholar, very fascinated in the field of hematology. So he's going to be our guest for next week. And if you haven't seen any of the videos or you've missed any of them, please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, and you'll be able to catch up on any that you may have missed. It was I'll move on from this one. We need to update this because we've now been here for 3 years. This was when we did our first 150 guests. But as I always say, belonging wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the willingness of individuals to share their stories, individuals to give us an insight into their experiences and their sense of belonging. So as we approach this weekend, just think about it and think about how we can enhance our own sense of belonging and enhance the sense of belonging for someone who we love. So until next week, have a good week, and I hope to see you again next week, Friday. Thank you. Bye-bye.